shake hands.
All right. Thanks for coming. My name is Amy Beinart. I'm the president of the Bernal Heights Democratic Club. It's an amazing turnout. Member of the executive committee of the Bernal Heights Democratic Club, please raise your hand. We have an amazing team of people who pulled together to...
Could you speak louder, please?
Wow. Okay. That I thought I was using my New York voice, but all right. So our executive committee is here. A group of us that work together very hard to pull off events like today, but also throughout the year. We have forums on specific topics. We have candidates come to speak. We have endorsement meetings, which is a very important part of what we do as we roll up to the election, so that we can create a slate card of recommendations that we distribute door to door to every household in Bernal Heights. And we get, yes,
If you become a member, do you get an email notification?
So we're not going to be doing questions right this second while I'm talking. Sorry. We are, so tonight's agenda, sorry, distracted, I had a busy day. Tonight's agenda is a Mayoral forum, Mayoral candidates forum. And the way we began this process was that we sent out questionnaires to all 8 candidates who filed, and we received responses from 5 of them. We invited all 5 candidates. We have acceptances from 4 of the candidates. I see 3 of them here before us, and we'll see if the final candidate gets here in time. We hope so. As far as membership, we do encourage membership. Membership is open to everyone who lives in Bernal, who subscribes to the principles and values that the Bernal Heights Democratic Club works towards. All that information is on our website, which is BeverlyHillsDemocrats.org. We also have a Facebook page, and so and usually the Facebook page is where you can follow like events. That's where we keep more up to date. Our next meeting, so this is only one piece, one very, very important piece, but one piece of what's coming up on the June ballot, but there's a whole lot of other stuff. We wanted to make sure we had enough time, and it's going to even feel tight tonight, I'm sure, but we wanted to make sure that we had enough time to such a critical moment for San Francisco, and I know that you'll all speak to that tonight. We are having our next meeting on April 12th, and we'll be doing the rest of the endorsements at that time. The executive committee is still working out exactly how we're going to manage all that. There are quite a few ballot initiatives and quite a few candidates for federal, state, local positions, so it's going to be jam-packed, but please come back on April 12th.
Is that for the November ballot? Or
that's for June. We're still working on June. The goal is to get all of our endorsements in place so that we can get our recommendation slate card out to voters in early May in time for the mail ballots. So we would love to have members and volunteers help us with that, help us with coming up with our endorsements for the rest of the ballot, and also to help us with distribution of those recommendations once they're out. So if you can always email us, Bernal Heights Dem Club at Gmail. You can always get in touch with us through Facebook. But we'd love to have more participants. Those of you who are members, and how many people are members here who got ballots that they can? Oh, good. Okay, great. It's great to have people who are non-members here. We just also want to make sure that we're responding to and serving the membership of the organization. So if you did receive a ballot, you'll see that we've marked the recommendations of the executive committee on that. The executive committee is an elected body by the Democratic Club membership. So, and we do consider that we're in a place to be.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So that we do feel like we're in a position to make those recommendations, and we hope that you find them useful, but they're absolutely not, that's not supposed to dictate how you vote. And we look forward to seeing how this vote turns out tonight. We're going to start off with each of the candidates having a 4-minute speaking time to speak. And then we will go and your timekeeper here is Linda Weiner. She's going to give you, sorry. We have President Meredith. And you have a,
30 seconds, 1 minute.
okay. And then after we go through that, or during that time, we will be accepting questions, written questions on cards. Who's got the cards? Only you?
No. There'll be more of us.
Okay, great. So if you have a question, you should grab a card, write your question down. What we're looking for are questions that we're going to be posing to all of the candidates, each of the candidates, and we want to make sure that what we're really trying to tease out here are things that help us to differentiate between candidates. We know that some of the initial candidate speaking events have some of the responses were, well, they all sound alike. Well, we know that they're not all alike. We know you have different feelings and priorities and approaches, and we want to be able to tease those out. So think about that if you write a question. And those of the team who will be picking up the cards once you've written on them will work to sort those and call out some interesting questions. I was thinking I would say something about San Francisco and crossroads and all of that stuff, and I know that people have those feelings about San Francisco, that there's like a moment we're trying to grab hold of some of it slipping away from us, that people who are trying to, that San Francisco, which used to be very welcoming to newcomers, is no longer welcoming, that people who have been here for a long time are thinking maybe it's time to get out. We have, crises of homelessness, of affordable housing, this overbuilding. We have, this level of kind of property crime that's going on, and feeling that just the city is not very welcoming anymore, and that there's a real chasm between rich and poor, and that's not how the city used to be. So, with that, I am going to turn this over.
I just have one comment. Maybe our candidates don't know this, but on Bernal Hill, we developed a slate card based on our membership vote, and we hand deliver it to every single household in every precinct of Bernal.
Fantastic.
She said that.
So just one more thing. I know that we're not like super comfortable here, and some of you are more comfortable than others, but I do want to express gratitude for this space. Bernal Heights Neighborhood Center is celebrating 40 years. It's not magic that it happens, so if you're trying to think of organizations to support, and they're completely separate from us because we're a political organization, they're a 501c3, but I would encourage you to drop them a contribution and help repay them for making their space available to the community. With that, I'm going to ask the candidates to begin their speaking. I think what we'll do is go alphabetically to start. And
I'm used to that.
We'll start with you every single time.
That's okay.
That up. All right. So 4 minutes to keep your eye a little bit. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. I'm Angela Alioto, and I am running for mayor of San Francisco for many of the reasons that were just mentioned. This is a critical mayor's race. Critical. It could potentially determine the next 10 years because it's a year and a half of Mayor Ed Lee's term and then 2 4-year terms. So it is extremely important that the right person get into this office and put the city back together again. By the way, I'm saving this chair for London Breed. Am I not allowed to say that? Oh, good. I'm going to put a chair at every panel and community event. Look at all of you. How great is this? How democratic is this? I mean, wonderful. Now, I was the vice chair of the Democratic Party for 8 years, and we did everything we could to get so many wonderful people out to community meetings, especially during such a critical election. And in this election, we've been doing this now almost 2 months. This election, every single panel we've gone to, and believe me, my colleagues here will tell you it's almost every other night, there are hundreds of people, dozens and hundreds of people, and they're not the same faces. You know, at some point you start looking at the exact same faces, and that's when you need to start going to the neighborhoods more often and walk the streets, because you need to meet new people. This is an IRV election, meaning that on June 5th, the next mayor of the city will be elected. There is no runoff. So you vote 1, 2, 3. And if one doesn't have 50%, which we don't believe there will be anyone with 50%, then they count the second votes. So the second votes are very important. But it's an election that has never happened before in the city. So it's so great to see all of you here tonight and being so involved in politics. Thank you so much. I'm a mother of 4, grandmother of 5, born and raised in San Francisco. My father was Mayor Joseph Alioto, one of the greatest mayors this city ever had. I can't say one of the greatest. Now, don't booing about that. That's unfair booing, because you weren't there. I don't think any of you were there. Well, maybe I was. I was there. I was there for the Summer of Love, which is why the Summer of Love is so important to me in Golden Gate Park, which was vetoed by the department. At any rate, that's a whole other story. As a member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, I have an amazing, in my opinion, career as a legislator. I had the most amazing, 1 minute already? I just started, I'm Italian. Okay, I'll go through this quickly. As the president of the Board of Supervisors and a member of the Board of Supervisors, we did some amazing legislation. It was in the middle of the HIV epidemic, and we legislated more federal funding for HIV than any other office ever legislated, and for gay rights, and for partnerships, which was at the time a real struggle. Harry Britt was my mentor, and he appointed me as chair of health when I first won. I wrote the sanctuary law, the original sanctuary law I wrote in 1990, and I also wrote some other amazing, like medicinal marijuana was my law. I banned cigarettes in the workplace. It's a phenomenal legislation that went nationwide. I did the needle exchange legislation, which is at a time when people were dying from using other people's needles, and it was an exchange. It meant you take one back and you give a clean one. The DPW for the last 10 years has been giving, time's up, giving needles and not taking them back. That has to change. Let me just say quickly, the soul of our city is being torn away, torn away. And if you don't put someone in that office for the mayor's race who loves this city very much, we're going to be very, very sorry.
Standing up when you talk, because somebody actually, just a quick question, somebody says not that long ago, all the candidates.
Sure. Thank you, Amy. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mark Leno, and thank you. In this exercise in democracy. I have been a small business owner here in San Francisco for the past 40 years, as well as having served on the Board of Supervisors for 4 years, the State Assembly for 6 years, and the State Senate for 8 years. And when I came to San Francisco in 1977 as a young 25-year-old queer Jewish boy looking for a safe place to land, San Francisco opened its arms and welcomed me, and provided me with opportunities, basic opportunities, like renting an apartment, being able to start a business, to work hard, and to succeed. And today, those opportunities are really slipping away. And so I am running for mayor because our time is now for a new direction at City Hall. Our crises of homelessness and housing affordability and availability, property crime, mess on our streets, it's all out of control. And we need a mayor who is going to think big and think differently and think regionally and reject cynicism and then demand results. Results like I was able to accomplish when I was in the legislature. I was able to amend the Ellis Act to exempt SROs protecting 12,000 of San Francisco's most vulnerably housed from eviction. California's minimum wage to $15 an hour, first state in the country, lifting 2 million Californians out of poverty, giving a wage to over 5 million. And then also bringing home $120 million to save Community College of San Francisco in the depths of our accreditation. As well as $500 million to expedite the construction of 3,300, yes, 3,300 affordable housing units at Mission Bay, Trans Bay, and Hunters Point Shipyard. So I will be announcing tomorrow a very detailed plan so that we will, and this is a commitment, end street homelessness by 2021. And we can do this if we set our mind to it, if we make it a top priority, and then we put our money where our mouth is, we can finally turn the corner and make sure that those living on our street are treated humanely and have a roof over their head, and thereby also helping our small business owners and our neighbors who have to live with the challenges that having 3,500 people living where they should never have lived anyway, and that is on the streets. So I've also, I want to thank all of my colleagues, fellow candidates here, for signing our fair campaign promise. And in that promise, we all say that we denounce and renounce and reject any super PAC spending on my behalf or against any of my opponents. Is that it's time for San Francisco voters to be able to decide for ourselves without the corrupting influence of unregulated, unlimited, often secretive special interest money. Right. So, unfortunately, one candidate is not. There are already 2 super PACs formed on her behalf. and we don't want to see this turn into a nuclear escalation where someone now got to come to defend one of us after weeks. We want to put this out from the start. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Amy Weiss, and the time for a new direction for San Francisco was actually in 2011 after the global financial collapse, when we had an opportunity to build our economy in a new way. And unfortunately we missed that opportunity when John Avalos came in second with about 35% of the vote. And another time when it was the right time for a new direction for the city was in 2015. And that is why I stood up with other candidates, including Francisco Herrera, and we challenged Ed Lee and the direction of the city. And unfortunately, my fellow candidates didn't join me at that time, but we could have done it, because guess what? 3 candidates using ranked choice voting that were relatively unknown, we got 35% of the vote together, and part of that was with this group endorsing us, so thank you for that. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My parents moved, I was born in 1977 in Berkeley at Alta Bates Hospital, and my parents moved to San Jose 6 months after I was born, and they were able to buy a home on the salary of a union appliance salesman at Western Appliance and a part-time nurse for $70,000 in 1977. Now that home is worth $1 million. today. I was the first generation of my family to go to college. I went to De Anza Community College. I learned critical thinking for the first time. Didn't learn that in high school or from the family. And then ended up going to UC Santa Cruz and dedicating my life for the next 15 years to service in different ways in a variety of fields, from mental health, transitional housing, leadership and development, harm reduction. So I've worked in these programs, I've built and developed these programs, I've evaluated these programs. Then I went back to school. I moved to San Francisco in 2007, and I went back to school at SF State for a master's degree in organizational development. While I was there, developed a program that connected graduate students with local nonprofits, because I hate to do anything just as an exercise. I want it to count. And so with that, we were able to create this program that focused on program evaluation and planning with nonprofits. And Shimon Walton, who's running for District 10, his organization actually participated in that first batch, and it's been offered 3 times since. So then in 2011, never been involved in local politics before, but the Chase Bank fiasco on Divisadero happened, where Ed Lee's Department of Planning allowed for the ability to demolish or to take 3 storefronts with 2 local businesses and collapse them into one for a Chase Bank to move in. And I said, wait. Aren't they complicit in that whole global financial collapse thing? And why is it that they're getting the red carpet rolled out for them? So my neighbors took me under their wing, including Dean Preston and Gus Hernandez, taught me the zoning code. I said, you know what, if we're going to actually make sure that we're focused on anti-displacement and inclusionary sustainable growth, we have to become the developers. So 3 things really quick. Don't accept anything less than a candidate who says that they will commit to stabilizing our encampment crisis of 3,000 to 3,500 people on our streets by June 2019. Don't accept anything less. I have a plan for it. We can do that. We need to prevent tech boom displacement 3.0 that's currently going to happen with the Central Soma plan. We need a plan for citywide development. The 3rd thing, I've created something I call an outcomes tracker. It is so important that we have measurable outcomes, that we are tracking the progress of whoever becomes our next mayor. Remember, I love program evaluation. I love being able to create measurable goals. So let's make sure that whoever becomes mayor, I've created 12 categories so far with 42 different points that we can track progress on. Because guess what? It's complex. There are many different issues with this. So you can get to that at weissformayor.com. Excited to share this night with you. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here today. My name is Jane Kim, and I've had the pleasure and honor of representing our great city, starting on the Board of Education and then on the Board of Supervisors, representing your sister district to the north, which includes South of Market, Mission Bay, Treasure Island, and the Tenderloin neighborhood. Over the last decade, I have really been proud to have fought for the city with all of you. I have negotiated and won and built more affordable and middle-income housing than any city legislator in the last 7 years. And I've done that by standing up to developers and working with them to make sure that we can build more housing that San Franciscans can afford. A lot of people don't know this, but 60% of San Franciscans qualify for affordable housing under federal guidelines, and we need to make sure that as we grow as a city, that we're building housing that's affordable for San Francisco families. I've also been proud to work with you on passing the strongest tenant protection ordinance in the country, Eviction Protection 2.0 in 2015, where we, thank you, where we vastly reduced low-fault evictions throughout the city that were fueled by speculation for people painting their bedroom walls, leaving their bikes in the common area, and for the first time ever instituted vacancy rent control when a landlord institutes an owner move-in to ensure that they're not doing a fake owner move-in in order to put it out on the market 6 months, a year later for $5,000 more. I've also been the education candidate over the last couple of years. I started out on the Board of Education. Prior to that, I was a youth and family community organizer with Chinatown Community Development Center, and I've made education a centerpiece of my work. I was the author of the reauthorization of Public Education Enrichment Fund, which then Supervisor Tom Amiano had authored in 2004, which is now bringing $77 million into our public schools, funding art teachers in middle schools, librarians in elementary schools, toilet paper. These are the very things that we lost via Proposition 13. And I was proud to have worked with you in 2006 to pass an ultra-luxury real estate transfer tax that has made San Francisco the only city in the nation to make community college free again. We saw a 51% increase in enrollment of San Francisco residents just in the first semester. And we are hiring faculty again. Classrooms are filling. And what's even greater is that in this semester, the enrollment has continued to go up, showing that it's not just the initial excitement of Free City College. And I want to work to ensure that that program becomes permanent and that we extend it to the summer semester, which I was not able to win in negotiations with the mayor last year. I also have a measure on the ballot this upcoming June 5th to make childcare affordable for every single family in San Francisco. We're very lucky. It's Proposition C for childcare. I don't know how we got that, but we did. I hope you'll be voting for it. We have one of the lowest taxes on commercial landlords in the country at 0.3%. Oh, okay. I was like, oh. And we are doing a 3.5% increase, raising it still below the rate of New York City, which has a tax rate of 4 to 6%. And we will be raising $140 million to make San Francisco's single largest investment ever in early childhood education. And it will take 2,500 low-income and homeless families off the wait list immediately into a child care slot. We will also, for the first time ever, raise subsidies for middle-class families that make up to $200,000 a year so they can afford child care as well. And finally, we will raise the wages of child care workers in the city and make it possible. Some of these child care workers are women of color and immigrant women, so it is absolutely an equity issue. And yes, we have instituted card check as part of the agreement in the measure to ensure that child care workers have the right to unionize as well. Running for mayor because I believe that there is much, much more work to be done. And I think one of the single most important things that we can be doing in San Francisco today is regrowing and supporting our middle class again. The middle class in San Francisco used to make up 45% of the population. It has now declined to 33% and has declined probably even more in the last 5 years. And by the way, middle class is a large group. It's families that make between 50 and 150,000. Oh. Went from a minute to time's up. But anyway, part of my platform is that we reinvest in the very social infrastructure that has allowed our city to grow middle class at one point, and I want to do that again here as mayor. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much, all four of you. Laurel and Yanina and Allie have been collecting questions, and I think they pulled out 5 questions to start with. I think that's probably about as much time we have. We're going to give each person 2 minutes to respond, and we'll go in backwards alphabetical order. So Yanina first, and you can work out the rest of the alphabet.
Okay. What is your position on Scott Wiener's transit housing bill, SB 827? If you oppose, what is your proposed alternative?
So it seems like it's going like where the Scott Wiener's putting out this bill to shake us all up right now and say, oh my God, 8 stories all throughout San Francisco? No, but then that's preparing us to do something in between, and that's a classic negotiating tactic, right? This happened with the tasers, where the POA said, hey, we're gonna put this on the ballot, and then Chief Scott said, no, we actually have to approve it before then. And so it's this good cop, bad cop type of thing. So let's think about it that way. This idea of upzoning and increasing density near transit hubs, great idea. But what we need to do is make sure that we have anti-displacement measures that are very strong in this, and also that we have inclusionary that is going to make it worth it for us to be able to actually balance out our regional housing needs. And so I am saying that it is imperative that in any upzoning and increased density, we have 50% affordable that is stratified from 15% to 120%, that 50%. And so it makes it easier to pencil out, but we do need financing mechanisms that are different than what we currently have in order to do this. I have some ideas about that. But one thing that I would like us to think about is that instead of the 8 stories and anywhere in the city, let's truly go by these, places that have single-family housing, RH1 zoning, that's near BART stations. And what we could say is that you don't need a conditional use hearing to demolish a single-family home if there's never, ever, ever been an owner move-in eviction, there's never been an Ellis Act eviction, there hasn't been a vacancy of more than a year. And one of those units that you can build up to maybe 4 stories, one of those units has to be affordable. So that is an exciting proposition for us. And remember, the Central Soma plan, it has a 5-to-1 at best odds of housing, for jobs to housing. And we need to be able to build somewhere in San Francisco if we're going to make that move forward. Thank you.
I think so.
Trying to figure out the alphabet here.
As I've said in a number of other forums, I'm opposed to the bill. Opposed to the bill as introduced. It's now amended. I still have problems with the bill, so I remain opposed. And Supervisor Wiener is an artful legislator. I'm sure he's going to try his best, but there's a fundamental problem with it, which I don't know that he'll be able to surmount. And that is the question of whether a one-size-fits-all land use and planning state law can work. What has San Francisco's land use policy challenges, surrounded by water on 3 sides, have to do with just about any other city or region in the state? And that's the difficulty. And you bet there are parts of the state that are building not only no affordable housing, they're not building any housing. San Francisco is building more housing per capita than any county in the state. And we're building more affordable housing. Now, do we need more? You bet. But I know it's likely in reaction to what the mayor of Brisbane said, just down the street from us, right opposite the bay as we head to the airport, where he was going to create a corporate campus and for 3,000 more jobs. When asked where these new workers were going to live, he said, "Oh, San Francisco will take care of that." So we've got to do something about that. But aside from amending San Francisco out of the bill altogether, I don't know. And then there in the equities in Los Angeles and other places, it's very problematic. So one other thing that we can do, and I suspect we'll talk about it later this evening as well, is we're continuing to create all these new jobs. We need to have more local hiring, and not just business. Think about it. If we hire locally, and we can, there are a lot of under and unemployed people in San Francisco, then that person doesn't need additional housing, that person doesn't need expanded community, because we're all ready.
I just came out with a Medium post today on my position on SB 827, and I am opposed to it. And there's a number of reasons why. I think at a first blush, it makes sense to increase housing along transit-rich corridor, and that is exactly what I've done in the district that I represent. But I think there are a number of issues with the bill. One size fits all does not work for housing for the state of California. It absolutely does not. And 2, if you are going to raise heights and density in corridor, and this is something that I do in District 6, you also must raise the obligation of those developers to build more transit, to build more affordable middle-income housing, to build open space, the very infrastructure that we need to build a healthy and complete neighborhood. Housing is just one component of that. Every time I have raised height and density, I've done that in exchange. And by the way, when we do that, we confer value to land, right? So we raise the value of the land that you own. I ask you to share that value back by building more affordable housing than you were originally required to do. And SB 827 does not do that. There's another big issue with SB 827. It disincentivizes regions that don't invest in public transit when San Francisco has. SB 827 will upzone 92% of the parcels here in San Francisco, but none of Marin or Napa or Brisbane, the regions that have not invested in public transit infrastructure. This bill will absolutely discourage regions from building the public transit that they need. What we need to do, and I serve on the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, is that we need to link more transit funding to the production of housing. We need more carrots and sticks throughout the region to make sure that if you're not building housing, then you're not going to get the funds that you need to rehab your highways. That is simply how we're going to get the rest of the region to build. This bill will do the opposite of that. It will discourage public divestment. Sierra Club has come out in opposition to it for the same exact reason. Now, being in opposition to SB 827 does not mean that you are against infill development or against building on the west side. We can build through area plans, a process, the Planning Commission, and I am committed to doing all of that. We can do that here locally here in San Francisco and build more affordable housing while we do that. Thank you.
Originally, when this bill first started coming out about 2 months ago, it was already a different bill than it is today. As a born and raised San Franciscan, the concept of increasing the density to anywhere from 8 to 11 stories on alleged transit hubs, which by the way could almost be a bus line, it's really unconscionable. It just isn't thinking about city planning. Where's the infrastructure? Where are those people going to park? Who's going to take care of, now we've got this BRT issue down Geary, because we keep using Geary Street as the example for Senator Wiener's legislation, and it just becomes a nightmare. Now they're talking about taking away 30 bus stops. Who suffers from that? The elderly and the disabled, and quite frankly, people like me. And children, of course children. I am a mother of 4 and grandmother of 5, and San Francisco hardly has any families anymore. Why is that? Because we're not family friendly at all anymore. We're almost not a viable city, which is why I said originally this is such an important election. And talking about local hiring, I was the supervisor that sponsored the NBE-LBE, which is the Women's Minority Business, the minority business rules, that would say that all of this contracting that's going on in our city should be local people, they should be women, and they should be minorities, up to 16%. We are still at 4%. That was over 18 years ago. We're just at 4%. So this legislation needs a lot more thought. I'm sure Senator Wiener is very well-meaning. I get that. But could you imagine? I'm a Franciscan. I have to be, considerate of my fellow mankind. And we're the city of love. I'm trying to be nice, but he doesn't realize that you're going to have single-dwelling houses 11 stories high next door, single-dwelling 11 stories, or possibly corridors where nobody can breathe. This is the city and county of San Francisco. There's a lot of building going on. And we need to keep our city the great city it always was without making it a place that just isn't habitable. And hopefully we'll get to homelessness, because that's obviously a major issue to me.
Wow.
Do you support the POA's Prop H setting their
Repeat it
own...
louder, please.
Do you support the POA's Prop H setting their own taser policy to use the weapon at their own discretion and exclude civilian oversight and the chief from making changes? If no, what will you do to oppose this measure? If yes, why?
I don't know that you're going to get much disagreement for this. Oh, maybe.
Oh, no, I'm here.
I forgot where I was for a second.
I'm here.
I am resolutely opposed to this measure, and for a number of reasons. First and foremost, long before we give our police officers a new weapon, we need to institute reform. The reforms that were suggested and recommended by the Department of Justice, and that goes to the core of de-escalation training and making sure that our officers know how to calm a situation down, not how to heighten it. Wonderful interview on Terry Gross not a few months ago of a New York City police officer who had been on the force for 30 years, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, some tough days in New York City, and recounted that he never used his gun once. This is a true story. It sounds almost unbelievable today, but this is the way policing used to be done. So before we give a new weapon, let's make sure that there's crisis management, de-escalation training, and we know how to use the human traits that can relate and manage a difficult human situation. Beyond that, it would take the decision-making power away from the police commission, which is a very dramatic change in the way how we do business, which is the reason that our chief of police, William Scott, has opposed the measure himself. So if any rejiggering needed to be done, we have to go to the ballot. So I'm quite confident that with the coalition that will be opposed to this, that it may not be passing. And what will I be doing about it? I believe I've signed on to an oppositional argument that will be in the ballot handbook.
So I've already come out in opposition to Proposition H, and I have long said that before we add any new artillery to our police department, we have to really intentionally implement the reforms that were recommended by the Department of Justice for SFPD. But I have a lot of questions about tasers, especially because even locally, we recently had people that were killed by tasers in encounters with the police. So it hasn't been shown to be a tool that saves lives. What we should invest in is de-escalation tactics, culturally appropriate and language appropriate police officers that come onto the scene and can de-escalate. We've seen it many times, actually, that SFPD has been able to successfully de-escalate cases where an individual is armed and move the individual into a place of safety and then security, securing a whole location and keeping the city at peace. What will I be doing in opposition to Proposition 8? I also signed on to a paid ballot argument with Supervisor Amelia Cohen and other colleagues on the Board of Supervisors saying that this should absolutely not be done via the ballot box, and we'll be handing out many League of Pissed Off Voter guides and other through our field campaign, because it's not just about winning the mayor's race. We also have measures and other elected officials that are running, and we all have to win together. Thank you.
Well, I'll go. It's going okay, that's quickly. It gives a little diversity to the conversation also. You know, I come from, and I don't want to hear any boos about my dad again. I was born and raised in San Francisco, and the San Francisco Police Department has always been there to protect us. And I have to say one thing about running for office this time, because I ran for mayor in 2003 and just missed it. And that is, there is nobody getting along. The mayor of San Francisco has to get along with its police department. It would be chaotic not to get along with the police department. The mayor is the commander-in-chief, and it would be a horrible situation. I am for the proposition, which, by the way, I'm not sure why nobody's mentioned this. Tasers were passed last night at the police commission.
Policy.
So, yes, but tasers were passed at the police commission last night. In other words, even the chief thinks that there should be tasers. They might have different opinions about how they're used, when they're used, what the education is, what the procedure is. Of course you need to teach people how to use a new instrument. We are one of the only big cities in the nation that doesn't give the police officer the ability to use a taser. And you know, this concept that our police officers are out there just to hurt us, I'm sorry. I do not buy it. I don't buy it at all. We have a very important police department because, among other things, it has more minorities than most police departments, minorities, women in most police departments than anywhere in this nation. So as someone who was the daughter of the mayor, who lived through Zodiac, Zebra, San Quentin 7, Patty Hearst, our house was bombed 3 times. I got very close to police officers. You know, when I call a police officer, I want the police officer to come, and I want us all to have a good relationship with our police department. We need more police officers on horses. We need more police officers on bikes. We need more police officers on the street. We need full staffing of our police department, and we need to have great relationships with our police department, not bitter relationships.
proposition or you're for Chief
I'm for the
Scott?
proposition, I have supported the proposition.
Because Chief Scott's against the proposition as the.
But for
head-
tasers.
But I am against using tasers in San Francisco, and for this reason. So let's go back in time to Mario Woods, that incident. There were 6, 7 people, officers that were surrounding Mario. He was obviously in an incapacitated state. He was moving very slowly. 6 officers surrounded him with guns. If I had been there, I would have done it differently. And this isn't just talk. I actually go to encampments late at night. I go all over the city and talk with people all the time. Why? I have street smarts, first of all. My parents raised me right. But then secondly, I've worked in a psychiatric hospital. I've gotten training in de-escalation. I actually had to restrain someone in a psychiatric hospital. None of us had guns dealing with people. So let's go back to Mario Woods. So 6 officers are standing around him and half of them have a taser pointed at him. Do you think they're going to use their de-escalation skills in that moment? Not yet, because they're not trained in it yet, right? So we want what we were talking about before is we want to make sure people have that training in de-escalation. I want San Francisco's police force to be like de-escalation ninjas, martial arts experts, right? And also nonverbal and verbal and physical. I don't want trigger-happy police officers. I want de-escalation experts. And let me tell you, I was also on the street on Market at 11:30 at night a couple months ago. And I actually filmed my interaction with a police officer because somebody came up to me and punched me in the face, completely unprovoked. And my first thought was, this woman needs help. She was carrying a sleeping bag. She was out of her mind. I called 911, and against the better advice of the 911 operator, I followed her on my bike for about 12 blocks, and I was there with the police when they arrived, and she was going to be released later that night. It was the standard protocol. So if we have a stabilization plan for the 3,500 people or less that are currently on our streets, we will deal with these public health and safety issues, and we can focus on unarmed programming. Don't put more money into DPW and SFPD right now. Unarmed programming is what we need.
So we have several questions on this topic, and we'll try to be broad and hope that it brings out some of people's specific concerns. But how will you specifically work to address homelessness?
So on my first term on the Board of Supervisors, I actually took the challenge by the Coalition on Homeless to spend a night in one of our shelters. So I went through the shelter reservation system. I went to MNRC, Mission Neighborhood Resource Center. I waited online, and I got placed at Next Door Shelter in my district in the Tenderloin, and I spent 14 hours in shelter. And I learned a tremendous amount that night. One, I was far younger than everyone else in that shelter. In fact, people were far older and far sicker than I actually realized. And I also found that people who are truly sick actually get kicked out of shelter because our minimum wage staff members don't have the training or capacity to address the actual population that's coming in. I realized that for decades, San Francisco has been treating homelessness purely as a poverty and economic issue, which it is, but it's also a public health crisis. And we're not treating people who are truly sick. After that experience, I fought to get full-time nurses at every single one of our single adult shelters who are now in place, and they are doing God's work. I've gone to visit them, and our homeless residents need to see a nurse every single day, not once a year. And I worked with our late Mayor Ed Lee, who granted our office $6 million to build out a 24-hour medical respite shelter in the south of Market, where we have 75 beds, staffed not by minimum wage staff members, but by nurses, clinicians, and psychologists from the Department of Public Health. It is not the complete answer. We need to do a lot more of this. We must invest in mental health and substance abuse treatment programs on our streets, and we must also build more housing. The fastest growing demographic in our homeless count are not the people that you see on our streets. It's actually single working mothers with children. we have a lot of work to do. If families with jobs can't afford to live in San Francisco, we need to greatly expand our rental subsidy program so that families don't end up on our streets. We need to greatly expand the construction of affordable housing and the preservation of rent-controlled buildings through our small site acquisition fund, where we can take buildings off the speculative market and keep tenants in place.
From 2004 to 2012, under the 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness, we housed 11,000 people. It was the most successful plan in the nation. And the way that we did it, I did it with Gavin Newsom, and with 60 people, I created a council, got everybody together, a coalition for the same concept of housing people in permanent supportive housing. The people that we housed in our buildings, which is over 6,000 people, in permanent supportive housing, has a lack of recidivism of 94%. That means it's a huge success, that plan. It's a huge success. And why it got dropped in 2012 is beyond me. That means that those people we put in those units, after much work, are still in those units, okay? The way we house our homeless today is disgraceful. Shelters should be closed. I've spent many nights in shelters. I've been doing this a very long time. Shelters are inhumane. If you were homeless, would you go to a shelter? No, you'd go to Golden Gate Park or someplace where you at least feel like somebody's not going to kill you in the middle of the night or hurt your children or rob everything that you own. It is disgraceful in a billion-dollar city. We are a billion-dollar city and we have all these poor people sleeping on our streets. It's disgraceful. And the way to do it, we have plenty of money. We don't need more money for this. We have the money. We have enough. What we're spending on homelessness, we could put homeless people at the Fairmont Hotel with breakfast in bed. But the disgrace of poverty. See, yesterday, seriously, I've been saying this for a long time, the disgrace of giving up a program that worked, that put people into permanent. So when you take someone immediately off the street within 48 hours, you triage them, and you triage them. You know homeless people, whether they could go to a permanent place or not, or whether they need hospitalization. Triple diagnosis people need rehab. Alcoholic need rehab. You know right away. I met 3 homeless people last week that I housed when we were cleaning the dirty streets. And I got housing for all 3 of them. I've never had a homeless person tell me they wouldn't come away with me to housing. Never. So when people tell you they just love to come here and abuse us, that is so disgraceful that people should even say that in this city.
Wow. 3 parts to everybody's plan for stabilization over the next year. Number 1, we can and we should stabilize the 3,100 or so people that are currently living on our streets. Number 2, I've worked in transitional housing shelters, and I know how it's done right. It actually was in Portland, Oregon, and I worked for Transitions, Inc. at Jean's Place, and I know how we can redesign our shelter system. That's a mid to long-term plan over the next few years that we need to get started, and then we need the housing exit. So all 3 parts of this: stabilization, redesigning the shelter system so that it's humane and actually addressing the needs of the people that are there and getting us on a pathway to housing, and then the creation of these units. So I started the St. Francis Homelessness Challenge. How many people have heard of this work? So stfrancischallenge.org you can go to. But I started this after the 2015 election. I've dedicated my life to doing this work. And you know what's missing from the city's plan for dealing with encampments? Encampment residents. So I've been working in encampments with SFPD, with DPW, everybody's frustrated, with the Department of Homelessness, the HOT team. We can currently take $30 million, $20.6 million is going to SFPD each year just for encampments. Did you know that? $20.6 million for SFPD, $8.7 million just for DPW. Together, that's $30 million, more or less. I have a scalable plan that I've been piloting and developing that for $30 million, we can stabilize, even less, because it'll be a joyous summer of love and logic if I become elected. Even less than that, because people will pitch in across the city to deal with this issue. We can stabilize 3,000 people for $30 million with my plan. And I hope that you don't accept anything less than any of these candidates telling you they can't stabilize 3,100 people. That's a manageable crisis, everyone. Don't accept anything less.
So, any number of reports tell us that about 70% of those who are living on our streets today were living under a roof in San Francisco before they became homeless. So to the degree that we can make sure that those who are in a home stay in their home, we're already making sure that the situation doesn't get much worse. And that means right to counsel as well as rental assistance. And also, I will take Ellis Act victors, and they're not landlords for whom the law was written, but they are speculators. I will take those speculators to court and sue them for an abuse of the law. As I mentioned earlier, I'll be announcing a plan tomorrow that will lay out how we will end homelessness by street homelessness, those living on our streets, by 2021. So of our population, rough numbers, about 7,500 who don't have a home, about half of that, or about 3,500, are living on our streets any one night. And we have, by multiple reports, identified over 1,000, uncertain how many more, and we should know specifically how many empty SRO rooms that we have in San Francisco today. We don't have to build more, we just need to identify them, work with the property owners, and I want to recognize Supervisor Kim's good work just this past week, identifying some SROs that we will help folks move off the street and move into very quickly. But we've got 1,000. And then in addition to that, we know that there are another 1,000 folks who want to get off the streets every night because there's a waiting list at unwelcoming shelters where you have to be in by a certain hour, out by a certain hour. You can't bring your partner or your pet or your belongings, and we still have 1,000 folks on the waiting list. So we know people want to come in. And why have we not expanded it? Now, that's not the final solution, but it will get people off the streets to end their trauma as we continue to work and provide permanent supportive housing. That's it? Okay. Well, I'm sure
Next question is, what is your plan to bring in revenue? For example, Free City College is an incredible gift, but how do we prevent the $4.1 million shortfall from happening again? What do you mean by the $4.1 million shortfall? What does that mean? Someone who wrote this question,
No. I was assuming that what it referred to was that there was a conflict about whether or not we're going to be able to use the Prop W funds to Free City College because of shortfall. So really, I think that what the intent of the question is to say, how do we create more revenue so we're not stealing from other priority needs?
Well, my understanding is that the city hasn't paid the college, and the college is very, very upset that it hasn't been paid. So maybe Supervisor Kim could speak much more to this. This was literally her baby. But my understanding when I spoke to all the teachers out there and the administrators was that they haven't been paid the money, and that the college could potentially go bankrupt if the city doesn't pay up. So where it can get more money, I would imagine would be up at the balance. But I think that the college and the city should have done much more planning so that this nightmare would not be where it is right now and have all these teachers afraid of a school that's been there for decades closing.
Just to clarify, I think what the question is about city revenue rather than city college revenue. I think that the idea is, how does the city get more revenue so that the budget doesn't have these holes in it, so the mayor, when the next mayor is trying to balance the budget, they're not going after other. Are you going to explain?
Well, can I say one thing about that then, if you're talking about the city's general budget?
Sure. Yes, unless you're explaining the question.
What my understanding is that Mayor Lee did not want to release all the money that the tax took in.
Exactly.
And we have not been paid yet for what was paid out, but there's still money in that account that Ed Lee did not want to release to the College. So there is money there. We have received nothing.
Right, so I think that in terms of the question here, I don't think we need to debate whether or not that's happening. I think that's hopefully more procedural, but the question about infrastructure of San Francisco's revenues and whether or not we have enough money in our budget and what we can do to enhance our budget.
Well, let me just say one thing about that. I'll do it quickly. This is a $10 billion budget, $10 billion. I had to remind everybody at the panel the other night that $1 billion is $1,000 million. $10 billion. We don't need any more money. We need efficiency with the money that we have. It's one of the wealthiest cities in the world. The idea of adding more people or trying to get more taxes for more things when we have a $10 billion budget is insulting. And we have all these poor people living on the streets. So, in my opinion, we need to look at the individual department heads that are spending all of this money, and some of them need to go, with all due respect. Thank you for your service. You need to go now, because we need department heads that are going to do the job that's good for our city and our citizens, not do the job that's good for their own fiefdom. I might have already just said this because I've been to so many panels lately, and today too, and that is that if they don't understand what the job is, they need to go get another job. It's that simple. They don't pay attention. And I'm a civil rights trial lawyer. All my cases are wrongful terminations. I totally get it. Having said that, there's nothing wrongful about these terminations because our city's a mess.
So, like Bernie Sanders, I'm a democratic socialist in the styling of the Scandinavian version of democratic socialism. What does that mean? What does that mean? That means that the Scandinavian version of democratic socialism means that what we're doing is we're saying, yes, we can have private companies, and yes, people can make money, but we make sure that all the essential needs of the residents are met first, which means that Scandinavian countries like Norway have a high GDP, and they also have a high GNH. What's a GNH, you might ask? It's gross national happiness. Isn't that part of what we say in the United States? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Shouldn't we be measuring happiness? This small country of Bhutan actually came up with this concept of gross national happiness, and now they measure their success as a government by asking people, if you were to get into a financial crisis, how many people could you turn to for support? That's part of their gross national happiness. Remember that Donald Trump did us actually a favor if we flip the script on what he did with the corporate tax break. 35% to 21%. That was going from California corporations and San Francisco and regional corporations to the military and to the red states. Now we can take that 35 to 21% cut and say, hey, corporations, what an opportunity to joyfully build our cities and make sure that our residents' needs are being met. Yeah. Because you're not going to actually be paying any more money, you're just going to be redirecting it locally. So there's an opportunity to do that. Well, you laugh, but we live in a democracy, so we can write the script, can't we not? Yeah. We can write the script about how we do this. And so it's important for us to get financing mechanisms, and this isn't just some pie in the sky thing. I actually have ideas about how we can implement and get this money and capture it to use it for these needs, and Jane Kim and Mark Leno and Angela Alioto has already demonstrated that. So we can do this. Thank you.
With regard to the budget of the City and County of San Francisco, Angela is right, it's approximately about $10 billion. About half of that money from the state and from the federal government, which has specific uses required by law. But of the other half, the $5 billion, that is discretionary spending. And one would imagine there is at least a percentage or 2% that could be spent more efficiently and more effectively. That could provide $100 million to fund so many of the programs that we've already talked about that would benefit the people of San Francisco. How do you get to that kind of greater efficiency? You know, it goes back to the days of George Moscone and Art Agnos that used zero-based budgeting for the creation of our annual budget. And how that differs from how we've been doing it is that rather than department heads delivering to the mayor last year's budget, and we do have two-year budgeting now, but the last two-year budget, and then add on a little bit more for the coming year, but without any real review as to what was effective, what was not, which programs brought return on investment and which ones did not. When you build it from the ground up, line item by line item, you can review that which was successful and that was not, and that's how you build a more effective budget, because there is waste, fraud, and abuse, and we want to find that $100 million or more. When I was in the state legislature, I was always looking for new money, and one of the things that I was able to do was get authority for San Francisco, just for San Francisco. One of my Republican colleagues said, "You want to tax yourself in San Francisco? You voted for my bill." To allow San Francisco voters to decide whether or not to restore our vehicle license fee to where it had been for 50 years. And that could be worth $80 million annually for San Francisco, and it's a progressive tax, because the more expensive the cost of your car, the more you pay, the less expensive the less. If you don't want to pay it, don't own a car.
Because it's my baby. I don't have other babies, so I'll take this one. I'll address the question. So, Proposition W, ultra luxury real estate transfer tax, very modest increase of 0.5. Buildings that are worth $5 million and above, and we create a whole new category for buildings $25 million above. It will, on average, generate $44 million a year, and within the first 6 months after the passage of Proposition W in November 2016, it raised $27 million. Making City College free, $5.4 million. So a very, very small portion of the money that we have raised, we can absolutely fund it every single year. The mayor at the time only committed to a 2-year pilot, did not commit to summer semester, also reduced the financial aid program that we had initially put in place for full-time and part-time students. I want to reinstate all of that. Proposition W absolutely can't afford to make City College free for all residents, and also help low-income students for whom the fee is not the only barrier. The cost of the books and transportation and childcare is actually far more. And what we learned from these Oregon Promise and Chicago Promise programs, that low-income students weren't going to community college because they made it free for them, because the other costs were so much higher. So there's a number of things that we need to do to truly make our promise of free city college happen. I'm pretty confident that the candidates sitting here today will commit to that, and we must do that. Now, I did also mention it's a volatile revenue source. Last year I fought to get $1 million put into the reserve, because we knew last year was an up year. Every year we need to put money into the reserve funding so that on down cycles we can continue to ensure that City College is free for all of our residents. Now, I'm a big believer in progressive revenue measures. There was a time in our country when we had a progressive taxation measure, and at that time, we built affordable housing, we funded public education, and if you went to UC, we covered 84% of your tuition, now we covered 37%. And community college was free. It used to be free, we just made it free again. It was free until 1983. And because of this dramatic reduction in taxes on the wealthiest individuals and corporations, we have shrunk our middle class by divesting from those social institutions that grew our middle class and supported our working class. And I'm committed in San Francisco as a wealthy city that we will enact those measures, because we can, to fund the social infrastructures that we need.
So we have one final question, and we'll maybe, just in the interest of time, just do a single minute on this one. This is speed round. And the question is,
How are you different from the other candidates?
Well, one thing, I'll build on the last question. I have the slogan, tighten from the top to bolster the base. And so as mayor, it's not just a ploy. I will take $200,000 of that raised salary that Ed Lee gave himself, and I will put it back into a pool and tell everybody who's contracted or subcontracted or an employee for the city is earning a living wage and actually able to do their programming. And then over time, we'll be able to, when we're thinking about these cycles of boom and bust, we can have creative ways so that we can prevent there being these busts where we cut from the bottom, because that's what we always do. If you're in a nonprofit that's contracted with the city, you know that those essential services are cut when there's an actual downturn. But the other thing is, like I have said, I know that we can stabilize our 3,100, that's what the point in time count said in 2017. We can stabilize the 3,100 people that are living on our streets right now, in RVs, in tents, in sleeping bags on our sidewalks. 3,100 people. Are you with me, everyone? We can do this over the next year. I have a plan. I don't hear any applause for stabilizing our Except nothing less. We have a year to do it. Let's stabilize that crisis.
So, I guess one obvious. I won't go there. I know you're a guy up here, but you know that. I'm also the only small business owner, so I've got a real place in, well, non-professional. You're the professional small business.
My law firm's a small business.
All right. And I've served in, not only on the Board of Supervisors, as we all have, just about, and in the State Assembly and in the State Senate. And that experience that I had in Sacramento was not insignificant. I fought some real battles up there. I fought real powerful, deep-pocketed special interests. And I got the job done. So I will bring all of that experience back to San Francisco as well. But I do want to say to you that if you are as frustrated as I am with the direction of this city and with all that is going on in terms of homelessness and affordability and property crime and car break-ins and house break-ins, then join me and look for a new direction. Join me in shaking things up. And I ask for your vote on June 5th.
I believe my track record sets me apart. I've been one of the most prolific legislators on the Board of Supervisors, and in fact, for many years, I'm the top legislator on the board, passing legislation that I think matters to the working and middle class residents of San Francisco. I've also spent the last 11 years serving here locally on the Board of Education and on the Board of Supervisors, and have built up a track record of building more housing and also greatly investing in our public education system. I'm running for mayor because I believe that we here in San Francisco can do more, because we are not just a liberal city, we are also a wealthy city, which means that we can afford to enact dream policies that other municipalities can't even fantasize. We made City College free. Oakland can't make Laney free. We have the wealth and the base to be able to raise revenue, to actually demonstrate to the rest of the country what it means to invest in housing and education and healthcare again, and what the outcomes of that means. And I hope 5 years from now, we'll be able to demonstrate to the rest of the country what it meant to make City College free again, and why everyone else should be making the same investments as well. I believe that we need to turn the tide on what we're seeing here in our city, and our shrinking middle class and the growing wealth. We need to reverse that trend, and local government can play a role in that.
Okay, I believe I'm extremely different than my colleagues in many, many different ways. I think the most obvious is how passionate I am about putting our city back together again. As a legislator and president of the Board of Supervisors, there were no people sleeping on the streets of San Francisco at the time. As a legislator, I wrote the children's budget, and I wrote the sleeping on the streets in tents at the time. There weren't any. I could show you all the evidence from the time I was supervisor. I wrote the children's budget, which allocated all the funds that are still in effect today that go to children's programs, including after-school programs. I wrote the Youth Commission, which is a wonderful youth commission, and the Film Commission, because we're such a great city. I have been doing so much legislation when I was the 8 years in office that no other legislator who had been in office for more than 20 years had written as much legislation as I did that it directly affected the health and welfare of the citizens of San Francisco. Since I left City Hall, I've been a civil rights lawyer where I have represented every possible minority in every horrendous situation that has occurred here in the city and nationally, all over the world, actually. I won the largest civil rights verdict from a jury from people in the history of our civil rights nation. I'm a small business owner. I'll be a great mayor of San Francisco. We're going to bring back the joie de vivre that the city always had for the people, for the people. Thank you. Thank you. So if you remember, please make sure you mark your ballot. Keep in mind that this is a ranked choice vote. It's a ranked choice ballot. If you don't understand what that means, you need help. Ask someone. Come back on April 12th. We'll have the endorsing of the ranked choice ballot. And